A very special day for more than one reason, multiple reasons. But it is a very a personal pleasure, and it's a communal honor for me to be able to welcome Rav David Stav to our virtual community, and especially on this day of Simcha, of Yom Yerushalayim. So Gemara Brachos actually concludes the entire Masechta, the entire tractate, with a teaching that's shared with us by Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Hanina. We know this teaching. It's in our Sidurim. Some minhagim, we say it only on Shabbos and Yantiv. Some say it every day. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Hanina, Talmidei Chachamim ba'arbim shalom ba'olam. What's the teaching? That Torah scholars increase peace in the world. And the proof text, I mean, hopefully we see that in reality, but the text from Yeshayahu is based on, because it says, V'chol banayich limudei Hashem, because all of your children, and here it means children of the Torah, so all of the Torah scholars are knowledgeable of Hashem, V'rav shalom banayich, and there's great peace. And the Gemara, sort of is wondering, why you need to repeat the word banayich twice, and it says, if you read it without the nikudot, without the dots, it could also be read bonayich, your builders. So these children of Torah, these Talmidei Chachamim, are the builders of peace in society. Unfortunately, in Israel, there's a tremendous gap between the religious establishment, the religious world, and the majority of the population, which have many people who are secular on varying degrees. And sadly, it's been hard for non-observant or fully observant Israeli Jews to find a path to Torah and mitzvah experiences. Rav Stav and the Tzohar Rabbinical Organization, which he co-founded, have a 20-year track record of closing this gap that I just described. Rav Stav, his faculty, and the staff of Zohar are changing the Jewish complexion of Medinat Yisrael in a very positive way. This includes enhancing mitzvah observance for the Orthodox and for those who aren't, at least at this time, Orthodox. Zohar successfully paves the way for a more ethical, a joyful approach to Jewish life, and is bringing Israelis closer to our heritage. And doing so brings shalom. Knowing Hashem brings completeness, like shalem, the same word from shalom. Knowing Hashem, interacting with Hashem, Hashem's Torah, Hashem's mitzvos, brings this completeness to us. And when we are complete, it makes it easier for us to be at peace with ourselves, at peace with others, peace to the community, ultimately, hopefully, peace to the world. Zohar's accomplishments are helping to keep the Jewish people Jewish. And Rav Stav is the chairman of Zohar. He's the driving force. His influence is reaching to Jewish communities truthfully around the world. Rav Stav also serves, as if that task that I just described isn't large enough, but Rav Stav also serves as the chief rabbi of the city of Shoham. He's a graduate of Merkaz Harav, has served as a Dayan, rabbinical judge at the conversion court of Rav Chaim Druckman. He's been a Dayan at the rabbinical court in Tel Aviv. Rav Stav lectures, authors columns, has recently published several books. He's committed to doing what he and his organization can to keep us Jewish together. Again, it's my pleasure to welcome Rav Stav to our virtual experience. Rav Stav, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for the very warm introduction. Well, I guess if you follow the news in Yerushalayim, the news that come from Yerushalayim now are not so good. We know that it was bombed this afternoon by rockets from Gaza Strip. I was there a few 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago. But nevertheless, nobody could take from us the very special feeling of being in Yerushalayim, feeling the very special atmosphere that exists in Yerushalayim. I want to tell you one of the anecdotes I take every year. My children and my grandchildren, whoever is ready to come, whoever is with his old grandpa, and I take them to a place where for me represents the miraculous era of living in Yerushalayim specifically, and in Israel in generally speaking, expresses the signs of redemption that we are privileged to live in. You know, I have a grandson that is 6 years old, and we took him this afternoon to a grocery store. To a grocery store where you can choose, hundreds of sorts of candies, chewing gums, different types, and it takes him about 5 or 6 minutes, and he says to his mother, "I cannot choose." I mean, it's the prosperity is so big. I have so many options. It is so difficult to choose, to pick up the right candy, the right 10 candies that I would love to taste. Now, this is not only a story of a child, it's a story of a nation that has such a huge prosperity today. We are privileged to live in an era of prosperity, of blessing, and we just have to know how to choose. When I want to talk, and when the rabbi asked me to talk about Yom Yerushalayim, he insisted that I will combine Divrei Torah, referring to Yerushalayim, with the amazing work that Zohar is doing and relating this issue of Yerushalayim. And I want to start with number one, with a very personal story. I grew up in Yerushalayim. I remember the war, the 6-day war. I was 7 years old, so you can guess how old I am, 61. I was 7 years old when the war broke out. And a few years later, I went to yeshiva. I still remember how my relatives from Brooklyn arrived to visit us a few weeks before the war. And my parents wanted to take them to the kotel, but there was no kotel. So they had to take them to one of the buildings near the old city in Mount Zion, and on one of the roofs they used to say, "Give a look here and there and there and here. Eventually you will see maybe the one row of stones which belongs to the kotel." The truth is, I never believed they ever saw anything, because I didn't see anything. And even if my brothers picked me up and wanted me to see the stones, I didn't see nothing. So I doubt if they saw. But this was my connection to the kotel until 7 years old. What hit me the most was 12 years later, maybe 13 years later, I learned in Yeshivat Merkaz Arav, in Yerushalayim, in west side of Yerushalayim. And Merkaz Arav is located between the central bus station and the garage of Eget. So the buses many times used to start in the garage was the first bus station, and then it went to the central bus station, and so on and so forth. I will never forget the following story. I go to the bus, I sit next to the driver, and then Ethiopian man comes to the bus, and he asks the driver, does this bus arrive to the temple, to Bet HaMikdash? The driver was secular. And you know what he's talking about. What do you mean Bet HaMikdash? This bus goes to the Kotel. There is no Bet HaMikdash. The temple was destroyed, was burned by the Romans. And the Ethiopian guy starts to cry. Are you serious? Are you kidding me? There is no Bet Mikdash. There is only leftovers. There is only reminders of this temple, and started to cry. When I want to say to myself, what is the essence for us of Yom Yerushalayim? It's basically the connection to Hashem. It's the connection to the temple. It's the connection to the place where Yitzchak Avinu was asked to sacrifice his life because of God's demand, God's request from Abraham. For us, the place, the Temple Mount, is the place where the Jewish history never neglected even for 1 minute. Each one of you knows that when you celebrated your wedding, you mentioned Yerushalayim, Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim. But when you mentioned Yerushalayim, you didn't mention Rechavia or Talbiya, and not even Baka, although many Americans live there. This was not the dream. This was not the prophecy. The prophecy and the dream and the vision was Bet HaMikdash. That's the place that we were demanded to leave. We were forced, we went to the exile, and that's the place that we always reminded ourselves that we never forget. That's for us, Bet HaMikdash. I want you to know, first of all, you know, in the 19 years between 1948 and 1967, there was no bus under the number 1, because everybody understood that this number belongs to Yerushalayim, to the Wailing Wall. When we will come back to Yerushalayim, to the old city, then we will have a bus number 1. But until we are there, we continue with number 2. You know, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, one of his first decisions as a leader of the Haganah and the Jewish agency at that time, one of his cruel decisions was to take the new immigrants, many of them Holocaust survivors, many of them were the last kid that remained alive, and he sent them without any training to fight in Latrun in order to make sure that Jerusalem will be liberated. It didn't help too much. But he understood, and David Ben-Gurion was secular. He understood that to establish the state of Israel, to establish the physical platform, without establishing the spiritual component of Israel, it's almost meaningless. And therefore, he was ready to sacrifice almost everything in order to liberate Yerushalayim. So on one hand, Yerushalayim is the city of sanctity. V'liyerushalayim ircha, we say 3 times a day, berachamim tashuv v'tishkon. We all hope, we all pray for God's divine that will come back and will be present in Yerushalayim. I always recall myself a very famous letter, or the Ramban. Ramban was visiting Yerushalayim 800 years ago, more than 800 years ago. And when he comes to Yerushalayim, he meets two painters, and he asks them if he could find a minion in the Kotel. They're looking at him and started laughing. Are you kidding? To find a minion in the Kotel? There is no minion. There is no minion. Didn't you hear the very famous statement? The more the place is holier, the more it is destroyed. Kol hamekudash mechavero, charev mechavero. The more the place is sanctified, the more you'll see nothing. It's a desert. Shmama. No meaning. And when I recall, maybe we should mute somebody. And when we recall that, and we come today to the Kotel, and the only question that we should ask is, when we see the thousands of minyanim, is it a late Shachris or an early Mincha? Is it a late Mincha or early Ma'ariv? Is it a late Ma'ariv or early Shachrit? Because 24/7, you'll find always minyanim in the Kotel. So it's fantastic. It's wonderful. There's only one problem. One huge problem. When you ask most Israelis, when was the last time you visited the Kotel? When was the last time you visited Yerushalayim? The answer will be most probably when I was in the army and I was forced to visit in Yerushalayim, because these are the rules of the army, that every soldier has to come to Yerushalayim. A few of the rituals, finishing the different levels of training, are done in Yerushalayim, in the Kotel. For most Israelis, that's the only opportunity when they visit Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim became something that belongs to the frum people, to the Haredi people. Maybe, at the best scenario, to the traditional people, but nothing for the secular people. And that's a tragedy. It's not only that the city of Jerusalem has more than 55%, almost 60% of the kids that are Haredim, and almost no secular people choose to live in Jerusalem. There are a few islands of secular people that still live in Jerusalem, but most of them do not. We call it a negative immigration from Jerusalem to Ma'ale Adumim, from Jerusalem to Mevaseret, to Modi'in, to other places, but most secular people do not want to live in Jerusalem. Later on, not only they do not want to live in Jerusalem, but they do not want to visit Jerusalem. And now I'm not a tourist agent, and I'm not counting the days in the hotels or the parnasa of the Israelis in Jerusalem. That's not my issue. My issue is that I understand that there is something very deep that occurs in front of us, that happens to us, and we cannot allow ourselves to continue in that way, in that direction. You know, Jerusalem was chosen, says the Rambam, and that's why its sanctity never left Jerusalem, because the sanctity, the Shekhinah, is present in Yerushalayim, not only in Bet HaMikdash. That's how the Rambam defines the Kedusha, the holiness of Yerushalayim, because the divine is present there. But when we learn about Yerushalayim in the Tanakh, in the Bible, we see a completely total different story about the way Yerushalayim was chosen. I will go back to the Jewish history. David HaMelech replaces Shaul, and he has chosen his capital in Hebron. Hebron was the capital of Judea, Shevet Yehuda, Judea tribe. And that's the most convenient place to locate your officers, your army, because you know that your family and your tribe will most probably be very loyal to you because you come from their tribe. Just like us. Usually we are loyal to somebody if he's frum or he's not frum, if he's Sfardi or Ashkenazi, no matter what is done. But it goes through blood connections and not necessarily through rational understanding who is good and what is bad. So David HaMelech could easily stay in Hebron. That was the most convenient place for him to put his officers. But he understands that if he wants to unite the kingdom, and if he wants people to be under his sovereignty, under his kingdom, he needs to give them the feeling that the capital belongs to everybody. And that's why he has chosen to fight on Jerusalem that was not conquered at that time. And he said, I'm going to liberate Jerusalem in order to make this my capital. And this capital, as the Gemara says, Lo nitchalka Yerushalayim leshvatim. This capital will be just like Washington, D.C. It doesn't belong to no state of the 50 states of America. No, it will be an independent place. It will not belong to no tribe. It has halachic ramifications. People were not allowed to charge rent for living in Yerushalayim for several days because it wasn't their house, it wasn't their building. They couldn't ask for money. People were generous and gave the host some payments, but basically it was not there because Yerushalayim was not divided to tribes. It was an international and independent city that has no local tribe that has any authority on Jerusalem. That's what made Yerushalayim the place that caused Hashem to choose Yerushalayim as the place for Beit HaMikdash. The reason why this place was chosen is because that's the place where David HaMelech has gathered all the Jewish people, understanding that despite the differences, despite the gaps that existed then and exist today between Jews, the common denominator is still bigger. And this will be symbolized or represented by Yerushalayim. As a matter of fact, when we all say every day, ולירושלים עירך ברחמים תשוב ותשכון בתוכה כאשר דיברת, 2 seconds later we say, וכיסא דוד עבדך מהרה לתוכת אחים. We ask not only for the divine's presence to come back, but we ask for the kingdom of David to come back, because we know that these two issues are connected to each other. You know, the Gemara says on the verse in Hosea, Chavor la'atzavim Ephraim anachnu. Hashem prefers us to be united in worshiping idols rather than being divided, hating each other, split to groups, to nations, and worshiping him in Beit HaMikdash, in the temple. That's the essence of Yerushalayim. By the way, if you read Sefer Melachim tells us how Shlomo, the King David's son, when he built the temple, right next door to the temple, he built his palace. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says that his living room was in a door. A door was between his living room and Kodesh HaKodeshim. That's what the Gemara says. Shlomo wanted to teach us that there should be a connection, a deep connection between the palace, between the kingdom and Bet HaMikdash. And when Shlomo sins and he's cursed that it's going to split up, his kingdom is going to be divided, the first outcome of the division, of splitting his kingdom to 10 tribes following Yerovam and 2 tribes following his son Rechavam, the first ramification was that the people that belonged to the 10 tribes never came back again to the temple. They established the golden calf again, 2 instead of 1 in Jerusalem, 1 in Dan and 1 in Bethel, telling us that if the kingdom will be divided to 2, there is no existence to our temple. Hashem is present by us when we know how to be united together. Ata echad v'shimcha echad. Umi ke'amcha Yisrael go echad ba'aretz. We say this paragraph every Shabbos mincha afternoon. The Zohar explains, when are you, God, one in heaven, one here in the universe, when we are united? Ata echad v'shimcha echad, when we are am echad. But once we are split to so many tribes that nobody wants to talk with the other one, then there is no meaning to the temple. It's just a question of time, how long it will take until it will collapse, until it will be burned or destroyed. So that's the introduction to this conversation. It doesn't mean that if that's the introduction, that the next chapter will take as long as the introduction, but it will take much less. That's our mission in the state of Israel. We feel that the fact that more and more Israelis feel not connected, not engaged to Jerusalem, not engaged to the temple, not engaged to the Jewish heritage, it's a disastrous situation. It's a recipe for a collapse, God forbid, of the state of Israel. Don't misunderstand. And all political analysts spoke the same way today. The main reason why all these attacks on Gaza, on Jerusalem took place today is not because all of a sudden the Arabs, the Palestinians discovered that we celebrate today Yom Yerushalayim. We celebrated it last year and 2 years ago and 3 years ago. But the first time they feel that the political crisis could break us to fractions, could destroy us. And if that's the case, they will take advantage of that. It all begins on the level of unity that we feel toward each other, and this gives direct ramifications and consequences to our neighbors. Once we are united and strong, they know that not to start with us. Once they feel that we are a bit hesitating, that we are not united, that it's not nice to say it, that we hate each other, we're not ready to talk to each other, that's the place where they start to celebrate and to attack us. That's our mission in Zohar. Zohar is not political. We don't deal with politics. We believe that the presence and the future, just like the past of the Jewish people, was always depending on the content, on the essence of our existence and not on the technical or physical platform. You can create a wonderful platform of a state, a wealthy society, but if the content is spoiled, if the content is controversial, if the content is something that people could not gather around it and understand that that's what makes us nation, then we have a problem. We started 25 years ago dealing with different challenges that secular Israelis, and we focus primarily on secular people. Not because it's not important for rabbis to deal with Datiyim and Haredim and traditional, but our mission was to engage those who never show up to shul, those who have no rabbi, those that when they talk about rabbi, it's escorted with a feeling of disgrace, of hatred, etc., etc. We wanted to touch them. We started with weddings. I don't want to go into all the activities because I see that I'm running out of time. I could tell you today the following. Today, among the secular people, we are the address for them for issues of Jewish heritage. We are the address for them for celebrating weddings. For rabbis, we register and officiate every year more than 4,000 weddings. We help thousands of Russian immigrants, American immigrants, South American immigrants to prove their Jewishness in order to be able to get married in Israel. We have thousands of bar mitzvah boys to learn. We expose them to the beauty of Torah. We are not a tshuva movement. We don't have before and after pictures. That's not our mission. We are not missionaries. Our mission is to engage. Our mission is to make these Israelis proud of their legacy. Our mission is to make them interested in knowing a bit more, interested in coming to shul once a year or twice a year. I don't know if you know, most Ashkenazi Jews in Israel never come to shul, not even on Yom Kippur. There are lots of reasons for that, but one of the reasons, they disengage from them. They disengage from everything that smells Judaism. Everything that smells Judaism for them is coercion and business and financial issues. They don't want to hear from you. Our mission is to correct that. Our mission is to make them feel that Judaism belongs to them just as it belongs to us. We didn't ask for that. A few of my friends are even anxious, are concerned about that. But if you hear the politicians in the last 2 or 3 weeks in Israel, from the center to the left, which are the secular, all of them speak in one language. We want that the settlements of state and church in Israel will be conducted not by rabbi this or rabbi that, by the spirit of Zohar rabbis. That's the request. We want the spirit of Zohar to be present more in the state of Israel. It's not that we don't like Yiddishkeit. It's not that we disengaged ourselves from Torah. We don't want you to judge us. We want you to expose us to Torah, and we will choose what we feel is relevant to us. You know, there's a very special, and I will finish by that, very famous idea that Rabbi Zaks, blessed his memory, used to say. Jews throughout history were known as the chosen people, as the chosen nation. There is even a book written in America by Chaim Potok, The Chosen. But it was chosen to be a Rebbe. But we were chosen to be the Rebbes of Ribono Shel Olam, to the Rebbes of the world. But since the middle of the 19th century, but it arrived to levels that we never heard about before. Used to say, Rabbi Sachs, we shifted from being the chosen people to be the choosing people. We choose. Each one of you, when you live in America, you or your kids, has the privilege to choose whether he wants to stay Jewish or not. The atmosphere that surrounds him is not necessarily observant and not necessarily Jewish. He can go to the university, he can meet other boys and girls, Gentiles. Wherever he goes, he's surrounded with non-Jewish people. He has the freedom to choose. We thought in Israel that we are not in this game, that we were released from that mission. Here, we could force. So the last 25 and 30 years teach us the Israelis want to choose as well. They also want to be the choosing people. You will not tell me how to get married. You will not force me to put on film. You will not force me to observe Shabbat. We ought to show them the beauty of Torah. We ought to expose them to the beauty of our heritage in order to make them pride in them being Jewish. That's our mission. And if I come back to Yom Yerushalayim, our mission is to plant Jerusalem in the heart of every Israeli in the state of Israel. Our mission is to explain and to expose each one of us that the values of Yerushalayim are not only the values of Bet Mikdash. There are a lot of values. Yerushalayim b'mishpat tipadeh, v'shavea b'tzedakah. The prophet promises us that Yerushalayim will be redeemed by justice and by charity. And we all know that if we want to establish a nation of priests, just like we're going to read next week in Shavuos, V'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, a kingdom of priests. In order to do that, we need each one of our congregants. We need each one of the Jewish people here and overseas to feel that this is a part of his mission. At least we in SOA see in that a part of our mission. Thank you so much. And I leave a few minutes for questions. So, Rabbi,
Yasher kochacha, Rav Stav. Very inspiring. And I hope we'll take more of that mission on our shoulders as well. And certainly, wish you and Sohar success, because we know the more that we come together with one another, have shalom between us, that's our secret weapon for everything that could chas v'shalom harm us. I believe everybody has the ability to unmute themselves. So if you have a question, you could, if we could do this in an orderly fashion, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Then please remember to remute. So, any takers? You could also give me your signal, your hand. All right. So I'll let people think a little bit, but what people are either digesting and your thoughts or stuff. If there is anything that you would like to add, or
yes,
we're receptive. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to emphasize that don't think that this struggle or this split exists only by us. It exists all over the world. But there is a huge difference regarding this split in Israel and in America. If you don't talk to your Reform neighbor or unaffiliated neighbor, the worst is that it could impact your relationship with them The worst case, he will not remain Jewish because he said, well, I see my Jewish neighbor doesn't behave nice. It's on the level of individuals. I mean, it's very bad, but it remains on the level of congregations, in the level of individuals. When you talk about the state of Israel, the division is not only relevant to individuals, to neighborhoods, to shuls. Its ramifications goes far behind that because it impacts the way the spiritual strength of the army, the spiritual strength of the government, and don't misunderstand, the government and the army and the police are quite often doing what they're doing based on the feeling what is the public support or what is the public opinion regarding their behavior. Could give you one example from this from the events today in Yerushalayim. The government hesitated whether to cancel the flag march in Yerushalayim because it used to go through Sha'ar Shechem, through the gate of Nablus, and there were a lot of riots there. So the police wanted to cancel this march. The government, but then there was a huge public criticism on that. And then the prime minister decided the opposite. And then afterwards, there was a rethinking, and he changed his mind. I mean, and nothing strategic occurred between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock. It's all about filling the heart of the people. What is the support or the opposite of support to what we're doing? The same thing is required and demanded when we go to war, when we don't go to war, when we take decisions that could be damaging to certain people. What is this? What is the spirit? Is it the spirit of unity? Is it the spirit of embracing? Or it's a spirit that one tribe tries to take over the other tribe, to control the other one? It has a direct impact on the way the nation is behaving, on the national security of the state of Israel. That's why it is so important for us, and Mimela, for you. Yeah.
It's a very sobering message, Rav Stav. It gives us even more reason to want you to be as successful as possible and as soon as possible.
Bezrat Hashem, we look forward to see you here in Israel soon.
Yeah, I had the privilege of learning under and maintaining a relation with Rav David Lipschitz from Yeshiva University. And I remember twice, I think once when I was still in Yeshiva, and once I was in Rabbanus already in my position, and I went, and it actually I think was the last time that I was able to see Rav David while he was still in this world. And his message was a short message in Hebrew, 2 words, Hakol Be'ahava. Do everything with love.
Exactly. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I will say shalom to everyone.
Shalom to you, Rav Stav. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks to members of Kilat Torah Or for taking advantage of this opportunity. Kol Tuv, still here at Yom Yerushalayim, so Yom Yerushalayim Sameach to all.
Shkoyach.
Bye-bye. Have a great day. Regular Mincha Mariv today. Two minyanim for Mincha Mariv.